Welcome back to the Spiritable podcast. Sorry for the 2 months of wait, but we're back with our friend Alan Cowley, and today we're talking about suicide.
Yeah, so today we talked a lot about some personal experience with suicide or suicidal tendencies, some useful strategies for people that are struggling with that kinds of thought patterns or know someone that is, as well as positive and negative things communities can do to support people in this struggle.
And I come at this from a pastoral lens, so I deal with a lot of families who go through tragic loss, and I've also dealt with a fair share of my own. And I just think this is a really important conversation to have.
So thanks for sticking with us. Hi, I'm Luke.
I'm Richard.
And this is the Spiritable podcast.
We're having conversations about big spiritual, moral, and social issues in hopefully a more grounded way.
We talk a lot from the religious philosophy of this guy, Emanuel Swedenborg, and our own twist on Christianity. Check out episode 9 for more on that.
But of course, we don't have all the answers, so we like to bring on guests with their own philosophies.
Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, atheist, etc.
To help get new perspectives and to challenge each other's beliefs.
Everyone has some relationship with spirituality, but for some dumb reason it can be hard to talk about.
And everyone's experience with life is going to be a little different, and that's what makes it so interesting.
So, thanks for joining us on Spiritable. Thank you guys for tuning back into the Spiritable podcast. I want to quick apologize because we haven't put out an episode in like 2 months at this point.
Or a bit of a summer hiatus.
Little summer hiatus, little summer fling with vacation.
I actually figured out what it was, is you guys realized that you didn't have quite enough ginger on.
Yeah, so we were looking for another one.
So that, you know,
now we're very culturally diverse.
Very diverse.
I actually noticed that when you first sat down, I was like, "Oh, we got the redhead." Okay. I got some favorite.
Now we can have some real conversation
about the real problems of America. But yeah, we are here with our friend Alan Cowley. I don't know if you want to give a vague introduction about yourself and your history. What brought you here?
So I'm on vacation, and they're trying to make me work. No, I'm pastor of a church down in Boynton Beach, Florida, called the New Church at Boynton Beach, a very creative name.
It's a great church. Ben behind the camera and I went there a couple summers ago.
Yep, they helped set up my live stream, and if you want to go there, you can. Go to YouTube, check it out.
I'll toss in a link in the description or something.
But yeah, I went to the same seminary school that Richard did, graduated about 6 years ago, and was pastor in London for 3 years, and then down in Boynton Beach for 3 years. And I'm up here to visit with family, and decided to stop in and have a random conversation with you guys.
Fantastic. Yeah, maybe we'll put a link to it in the description or something, but we also did an interview with Alan when we were there working for his church, just about his life and some of the things that you've gone through. And that was really, really powerful. I liked that interview a lot. It's fun to do. So go check that out as well. Alan's got some great stuff in our history. Yeah. So today, just so viewers and listeners are prepared, we're going to be in a little bit more of a serious discussion revolving around suicide. And we usually like to keep things light and bantery and fun, but it's kind of difficult to do that in an authentic way when discussing suicide and how it's affected our lives. So be prepared for less giggles and a little bit more heart-to-heart seriousness going in here. Is that accurate to say, do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think there's joy to be found in different aspects of the conversation, but just generally the topic is one that a lot of people have a lot of pain around, and we want to honor that and not make light of it. Yeah.
And I think I came into wanting to talk about this because I know Alan has some, personal history surrounding the topic that I'd love to hear about if you're willing to share that. And also, we have one trained minister and one minister in training from the new church.
Untrained.
One
untrained.
Kind of like unschooling. In the new church religion. So I'm coming at it from a place of curiosity of wanting to know what my religion says explicitly about what happens to people who have committed suicide in the afterlife. What kind of process they go through, where they end up. And I'm not sure what kind of popular opinions are out there about people who commit suicide, but I think it'd be cool to see what we have to say.
I think the religious context around suicide historically has been really important for people's view of suicide, and so I'd like to talk a little bit about just sort of the history of how different religions have viewed suicide and treated it culturally. And of course, I'm in no way an expert on comparative religions. I've done a little bit of study of comparative religions and a little bit of research about suicide in comparative religions specifically. But again, if while I'm talking about it, I misrepresent anything, feel free to call me out in the comments. I'd love to learn.
Yeah. Or even comment what you think happens to people who commit suicide or in your religion or belief.
Well, definitely, it's interesting just to jump in a little bit. I feel like when I was growing up, the prevailing idea in the new church seemed to be people who kill themselves or take their own lives go to hell. Like it was almost a firm thing. And I'm glad that it's not that. Like after I got into doing my own research on it, I went, oh wow, that was misrepresented.
Interesting.
And I think that we're culturally getting out of that that concept. And the hard part is it doesn't mean that we should take away any of some of the fear of doing that, because I mean it's a really horrific thing for families to deal with.
Yeah.
And I would never want to overstep the other direction and kind of get to a point where it's like, well,
we don't want to encourage it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think religion historically has struggled with this balance of like, we want to let people know how destructive and painful this is and can be for the people involved. And I think that because of that, historically, religion has lost some of the personal care.
Right, because you want to present
people.
You want to present that when things are hard. You want people to realize that it's a rough time. Mm-hmm. But if it's happened to someone and they're dealing with it, you can't approach it with that same level of like, oh, this is a really bad thing. You have to approach it with a sense of love and compassion for whoever they lost and for the family that's going through that bereavement process.
Yeah,
which I actually think, which makes it a real struggle for religion when they're putting out like official doctrine about it.
Right.
You can't be like, it's really bad unless you're going through it, and then maybe let's have a greater conversation. People just read like, what do they say happens to people? What are our religious expectations around dealing with someone who has committed suicide? And those sort of things are laid out, and someone sees that. And that's where I think I actually really like what the new church doctrine has to say about life after death and the process we go through. And I think how that can be brought to the concept of suicide, I think puts it in a way that for me personally expresses the problems inherent in taking one's life and also the forgiveness inherent in the Lord's wisdom.
Yeah. One of the things that's really important when we discuss suicide is that it's actually, in every time I've dealt with that in other families and also in my own. Should I give a little just history for?
I don't want to
no, I'll just kind of, because it's there.
And it's something everyone deals with, so it's good to relate.
So my first service as an ordained minister was my brother-in-law's memorial service, and he took his own life. So that was the very first service I did as an ordained minister, which is, it's like, hey, just throw right into the fire. But he struggled with, he had schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia, and he struggled with that for about 10 years and had attempted probably 20 different times. And somehow how he lived through some of the things, like complete renal failure at one point because he had taken a whole bunch of pills. And they decide finally, okay, he's medically, he's not allowed to transplant unless it's like somebody in the family, but he doesn't go onto transplant list because he had already attempted. But so they decided, well, I guess it's time to let him go, and call it pulling the plug. Right. Well, they did that, and his kidneys start working again. Like, this doesn't happen.
Like immediately?
It was like
crazy.
Divine intervention, it seemed. Yeah. So he did eventually succeed in doing that. And what that's part of the history is about is most of the time that I've dealt with suicide in other families and in my ministry, it's almost always connected to some type of mental illness. Almost all. I've never seen a case where it wasn't. So the three other cases that are close to me is my cousin Carl was dealing with pretty severe bipolar disorder, some issues from, I think, being a military guy. I think there was some PTSD stuff in there, and alcoholism. And those things all kind of coming together, that there's always something else behind it. I don't know of anybody that would just, who is in their right minds, go, okay, and I'm going to take my life. Like,
right.
I think it's a compassionate way to view it as well. To flip it over to the theological side, I don't know if you came across this passage, but there's a passage in the writings for the New Church, and well, it's actually in his diary. It's in the spiritual diary or spiritual experiences, and he speaks of a person who had taken his own life.
This is Swedenborg stuff. Okay.
And he was basically explaining that there are times when the Lord permits a person to basically be infested with evil spirits if it would make for a better afterlife for them. It's a really strange passage, but it's like the Lord allowing that person to actually take their own life in order to have a better afterlife.
Yeah.
Which is a strange way to think about it, though.
And I think a lot of the way that I see that is God can't just stop people from taking their life, because it seems like for certain people it has gotten to the point where if God immediately steps in whatever way, it's a removal of their spiritual freedom. And we've talked in past episodes how like
freedom always comes up.
The highest thing that God protects, according to New Church doctrine, is people's freedom, because in that is their humanity. And so people are allowed to, evil is allowed to happen. People are allowed to do things that hurt them or hurt others because people need to be in freedom to choose. And yeah, so that passage is really an interesting thing, an interesting look at even in those worst scenarios where someone is really sick and they get to that point, there's still a plan to bring them into something better, to bring them into something good.
I feel like that's kind of tough, because I see it as kind of different ways of looking at freedom. Like on one hand, yeah, it's nice to say that we're always in freedom, but that in one sense kind of lends itself to saying that, oh, well, these people who committed suicide had a choice. Like they just chose to kill themselves, which seems really harsh. But then on the other end, if it's not free for them and then it's just evil spirits taking them over, then there's not freedom involved. So where's that love fall in there?
So yeah, that's so there's a whole doctrine around this that explains that a person, and it sounds negative, but we're going to unravel it a little bit, says that a person cannot be reformed if they're in a state where they are not in a state of full freedom or rationality. So you have to have both freedom and rationality. And once either of those are removed, the choices that are made in those moments really, in some ways, they're not culpable for them because they aren't themselves.
Yeah.
So a person, in order to be reformed, has to have both freedom and rationality. And for instance, in the service for my brother-in-law, that it focused mostly on a teaching that talks about that if a person's freedom or rationality is taken away at some point, and they have passed on, that essentially they pick up where they left off in the next life. So they would almost like say his symptoms of schizophrenia started at, say, 17, 18. He's not fully rational, really. You 18-year-olders out there, you're not rational at 18. And neither are these two yet.
Fair enough.
But I'm just joking. But we pick up like almost like it's like a play almost. Like the Lord allows you to make the decisions that you would have made had you been here in a fully rational state. I think that's a really merciful teaching. I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So then how does and this is getting kind of in the weeds of a very deep spiritual concept, so we'll bring it back around. But I am curious with that specifically, then how does that lend itself toward us having freedom? Because that sounds like something interfering with, that person's freedom if they're going through that debilitative of a mental disorder.
Well, I think that the teaching that he was bringing up, that concept is a way to restore freedom when physical things have removed it. So like someone with schizophrenia doesn't have the rationality at certain times to make a full decision about something. And that's mental disorder in general. Limits our abilities to make the choices we would want to make. And that's what's in the same way that, like, if you're missing a leg, it's pretty hard to run, and it's the same thing. And so what I think that actually is the Lord saying, I'm sorry that you weren't able to make these choices the way you wanted to make them. Now you get to. And so I sort of see it as a restoration of freedom.
I like that.
It actually goes to an even deeper doctrine about, and this is a strange difference between the new church and many other Christian denominations. We are not judged on anything that we do in this life, but what we would continue to do with full freedom, full rationality in the next life. Mm-hmm. So if we would continue to harm other people or, whatever it is, that continuance is going to be in a place where we're not harming good people. So that's what we call hell, because people would continue to do it. And that's a different way of looking at salvation,
like
rather than
deeper.
Like, okay, how many good things did I do in life? Is that enough? Or how many bad things did I do? Is that going to send me to hell? No, it's what would you continue to choose to do for eternity?
And we do have to be careful with that too, because there could definitely be people out there, and I'm sure we've all fallen into it as well, where we do something bad, but we're like, that's not us. I wouldn't continue to do that. We don't want to excuse that behavior. And that's, aside to suicide, not the same sort of thing. But.
And I think this idea, in contrast with the idea of judgment and salvation that other Christian faiths have tended to, really makes the topic of suicide, I think, easier for the new church to make sense of. Because if you have your actions result in salvation or damnation, and then you look at the action of suicide, you don't say it was a good thing that they did that, right? And so as a bad action that you've now had to label it, the result for a lot of Christian faiths historically has been damnation, because bad actions equal damnation. And that mindset makes it hard to get around that and see that it's a more complex issue. I think historically, and in the research I did, so there's a lot of stuff in Christianity historically and in Judaism historically about the treatment of people who have committed suicide, such as, they're not able to be buried with the rest of their faith in the cemetery.
Okay.
Well, and after death, like, they're not able to be buried in the same part of the cemetery or even at all. They're denied certain funeral rites that are necessary for salvation. Things like that are really, really hard to hear. But I think, stem from this problem of, well, is it good or bad? If it's bad, then that results in damnation, and we can't say it's good.
Yeah, but you also don't want to, I don't know. It's hard because you don't want to put that level of fear in people's minds where, if they're feeling suicidal, they feel a sense of shame about that, and that kind of heightens their dark feelings.
Exactly.
You don't want to put someone in that place, right?
Yeah. So I'm just.
No, I'm not saying that you are. I'm just, furthering conversation.
So to express the sort of the problematic nature of dealing with this issue, based on other faiths, and even so, I think in recent history we've seen all religion, as science has gotten a better understanding of what's behind so many suicidal tendencies, faiths have really gotten better at understanding the distinction that I think, from my perspective, is inbuilt in the new church faith about the things you do in freedom versus the things you don't. And so I think that religion in general has gotten much better and still has a long way to go, and is getting much better at distinguishing between what a person does because it's what they really want to do, or what a person does because they're struggling with mental illness or with illness of any kind. So yeah.
I did an experiment with, I was running a teen church camp thing, and I was looking at this whole issue of freedom and rationality. And essentially, if I can explain it as quickly as possible, but I had 2 buttons, and you were able, so there was a red button and a green button, and I had different scenarios for what would happen. If you press the green button, it basically said that you basically found the cure for cancer, and something, awesome stuff was happening. And then the red button, if you press the red button, you launched a chemical weapon attack and started World War III. So those are your choices, right? So each group, though, had a different scenario, and some of them didn't have any information. Like, there was just like, choose the red or the green.
Without knowing what they were?
Yeah. So, people just randomly go, oh, red, green, red, green. Well,
arbitrary.
So there was that one. There's one with, what would happen, but you only have the red button, or you only have the green button to press. So it takes away that level of freedom. And I set it up so that there were about 5 or 6 different groups. But then, without them knowing what each other had, I started marking up, okay, would you press the red or the green, going through and tallying it up. And the people who are sitting there knowing what this is all about, like, they're how are you pressing the red button? But the question afterwards is the person who didn't have any information culpable if they hit the red button? Like, should they go to hell for it because they just started World War III? Well, it's the action without the freedom. It takes away any. It's an exercise to show that you have to have both rationality and freedom to make choices that lead to either salvation or damnation. That's a pretty fun exercise. I like that. Do.
Yeah. Did you find it effective with those kids?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I feel like that's something a lot of the time that, as a society, it's hard for us to see in more nuanced contexts. I've used that same sort of thing to talk to people about, what is the right religion or that kind of thing. Like, let's say, I'm a new church person. So let's say that Islam is the right religion. And this is our world, it's the right religion. I'm growing up new church. Even though it's the right religion, because of how I've grown up in my environment, I am inclined to still believe my belief. Even though that might be the right one, as far as I know, mine's the right one. So flipping the script in that sort of way to show how, the world is not always exactly as we see it, but how people see it. And even like people being brainwashed into different like cult groups or militant groups or that kind of thing, removing their freedom and rationality in different ways, just really affects people. And so it's nice to be part of a belief that is forgiving and understanding for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's easy for people to look at their experience with the world and think like, oh, well, how could anyone else believe any different?
I definitely fall prey to that.
And it's a thing I think it's important for me, especially going into the ministry, to remember that like the Muslim I run into, the Buddhist I run into, the Catholic I run into, the Jainist I run into, they don't necessarily believe their religion any less fervently than I do. In fact, probably a bunch of them are more set in their religion than I am, are more confident that what they're doing is the good life that leads to good things for the world and salvation for themselves. And it's ridiculous for me to be like,
they're at fault for their belief.
Yeah, like how could you believe that? That's so dumb of you. When it's like they could be saying the exact same thing about what I believe.
Right.
And so it's just I think that really translates to the discussion about there's no way that we can put our understanding of the value of our life on someone who is struggling with mental disorder and suicidal ideation or action, because there's just it's so vastly different from our experience necessarily, that how could we drop judgment on, like, oh well, how could they possibly want to do that? It just, yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about what the new church says about suicide. Is there anything else the new church says directly about people who have taken their lives? I know before we started rolling, you were saying a little bit, but that the new church doctrine does not talk explicitly about that a whole lot.
Yeah, there's not a lot that talks specifically about it. You touched on it a little bit. There's a weird passage that talks about particularly a person living in hell that took their life and basically constantly tries to take their life. And that's their existence, basically. And that, I think, is not a passage trying to express
what happens,
what is the normal reality for people that take their lives. I think that is saying, like,
that sounds pretty extreme.
A person that is extreme and has taken enjoyment in self-harm totally in their freedom and rationality, which I think is so rare today that I don't think anyone will run into that.
Yeah.
And then there's another passage that talks about certain evil people in hell. So to back up a little bit, there's this whole thing we talked a little bit about before, that both angels and evil spirits are people, and they both can affect the way that we think. Our thoughts are affected by spirits that are with us, and it's the human freedom to choose what we're going to listen to, like power of good, power of evil type of thing.
A simple way to explain it is, like, think about a radio where you kind of have the old knob to turn it this way. Well, imagine you've got a couple of radios and you actually tune in according to what you love. You actually tune into a spiritual association with people who are like-minded or like-hearted, really. So yeah, we are always having this, but our soul is essentially like a radio that tunes to according to our affections to spirits that are like us.
I like that analogy. That's cool.
And so there's a passage that talks about specific types of spirits that like to try to get people to have suicidal thoughts. Like their whole goal, their whole enjoyment.
This is a passage.
Yeah.
Saying this.
Their whole enjoyment is to try to get people thinking about taking their life. And I think it is fairly clear that most people in full freedom and rationality can recognize those very quickly as not something they want to engage in. And so it is specifically people that are struggling that can be affected in this way. And then the other sort of thing that brings light to the discussion of suicide, which is similar to what you brought up, is that a person after death gets to go through what they need to go through, right? A person gets to process, gets to work through their emotions. And so it's not as if, I don't think it's not as if the act of suicide has no bearing on your life after death. I think what it is that you have a place that is safe for you to work through what brought you to that point, and work through it with a clear mind that you may have never had before. And so it's not as if you're like, I don't even know that I did this to myself. You're like, man, let me really work through the stuff that brought me here. Let me work through making this right with myself, if that's what you choose to want to do. And so it's a lot of people see suicide as an escape. And to that, I think the new church says, like, well, the stuff that you're dealing with, that's actually part of you, you're going to still have to work through.
Yeah.
But not the parts that aren't part of it.
But you're going to get to do it with a mind that actually
and it
is free.
I think
Get biblical.
now I'm about to get biblical on you. So the process in the afterlife, I don't know if you guys have talked about that much on this podcast or
little
not.
bit.
Yeah, we did a little step by step.
The interesting thing is everybody goes through at least the first couple of steps. Like, so the first thing is no matter how your life ended, you're going to wake up to the greatest sense of love and peace ever, like that you've ever felt. Like the highest angels are there just showering people with love when they enter in. And so I especially thinking about somebody who has taken their own lives, often would have been in a place where they might have not even known what that love was like or how it feels, or maybe feel rejected, but they're being entirely embraced and cared for. And I just like that image. But moving on to the second stage is one where we truly figure out who we are inside. And this happens through experiences. So let's say you were tied up, or you were involved in a group of people that weren't necessarily all that great, but you didn't realize how bad that the group really was. There's a story in the book of Revelation about the two witnesses. And the two witnesses are basically the people all in this city try or decide that they want to kill these two witnesses of the Lord, and they can't do it, so they call up the beast out of the pit, and he apparently kills these two witnesses, and they leave them out in the streets and have a big party and send each other presents and celebrate the death of these two witnesses, and then they are raised up by the Lord. An odd part that's often missed is right afterwards it talks about there were some there who were then lifted up into heaven or were brought up from that. And the way I like to think about this is if we're around a group of people that are doing some nasty things and we start to see how nasty they can get, there might be a point where we go, oh, I didn't realize how bad that was. I don't want to be a part of that. And it makes it we choose to change our behavior. It's a part of repentance. So in the afterlife, we're put into these situations where we see the depths of our negative inclinations, where we see how bad it can really get, and hopefully we'll go, and I don't want that.
I don't want to continue that.
Yeah. I didn't realize how bad it was. And so we have an ability to change our minds. Not that we're still the same person, right?
Yeah.
But we are more fully us.
We fully understand what that behavior would have been like and how it causes pain to others and to ourselves, and have the opportunity to stop doing it.
And if we've lived our life in such a way that we genuinely love those behaviors, then we're doing what we love. And it's kind of sad to overall goodness, but there's that aspect.
Yeah, and I really like you bringing in the idea of what we wake up to after death. And that love, because I think that was, with my experience with suicide, what was really, really essential for me. So a little backstory on that. When I was a younger person, when I was a teenager, I was really depressed, and I tried to take my life 3 different times. And it was obviously a really low point in my life. And what saved me the one time that I was not stopped, where I could have gone through with it and no one was around to notice, was remembering the few people in my life that I could still see that loved me. And And of course, there was a much broader group that cared about me than that. But there were a few people that were so adamant in their love for me at that point that I couldn't, even in my mental distress, couldn't trick myself into thinking that they didn't love me. And so I think, that idea of just people that have been through this and have gone through with this being received with maybe a love they haven't felt before or in a long time is just really,
it's a beautiful thing.
Really beautiful for me.
Yeah.
Remembering how much that was like basically what saved me. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you for sharing.
Reminds me of a song that I was in a band during theological school called No Reserve. Rock on. We did a couple of albums, but that band started because of somebody taking their own life. It was Grant Schnarr, who was another minister. Anyways, his son had taken his life, and Grant and I, Jason and I were good friends in high school, so we used to play music together. And so Grant called me up, and he wanted to process, and that was how he was processing, was by writing music. And the song that he wrote about Jason and dealing with the loss of Jason was it was called "Break This Stone," and the lyrics are really phenomenal. But one of my favorite ones is, it's hard to do it, but it goes, "Love, if that's the only thing that's left, then I can take another breath." And it's talking about his own contemplation of how do you go through with living after losing a child, and especially in that way.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean,
but yeah, the idea of if
too.
love is the only thing that's left, then I can take another breath.
Yeah, and I think that really has given light to me to how to treat people that are struggling, because I think it can be so easy for the struggle of someone you love to result in fear for you. And I think that when people are afraid, they often lash out. And so I think, unfortunately, a lot of times that people are struggling with suicide, they're met with aggression. Like, how could you do that? Like, how could you even think about doing that to all of us?
Right.
Like, don't you understand? Like, how dare you?
How could you do this to us?
Yeah, and I think that is a natural reaction when you're so afraid of that loss, but not helpful to the person who is struggling and probably in that mindset doesn't understand the love behind that fear, just hears an attack. And so they're like, oh man, that person's mad at me too. That person hates me too. Add them to the list of people that don't care.
Right. Fuel to the fire, kind of.
And that being said, one of the most powerful experiences I had when I was going through my
when you were in that place.
deepest depression was I was contemplating taking my life with the means to take my life, and my older brother came in and saw me and ran and tackled me and threw the knife that I had away and just for 2 minutes just yelled no in my face. And I started crying and he started crying. And he did it in such a way that I was obviously scared at first and confused, didn't really understand what I was about to do, didn't really understand what was happening with him. But by the end of it, so much love came through that I think there... And again, I'm no expert in any of this, but I think there can be a place for forceful love to break through to someone and say, how could you possibly think that I don't love you? That is the farthest thing from reality.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Really.
So, yeah, Alan, I'd love to, in your life and times as being a minister and obviously dealing with this stuff a lot, I think there's one thing to, I'd love to hear what you said in your first speech or sermon as a minister, addressing those bereaving families, but also in situations like what Richard's saying, like how to approach people who are in that really dark place. And that's definitely not something I'm comfortable saying, like, because I'm not trained in that at all. So I'd love to hear how you would address
I think
that.
if we could actually back up a little bit more, because the suicide rate it's increasing dramatically right now, and I think that there's an increasing lack of community that's being caused by artificial community. And I don't, it's all these people that sit around and watch podcasts and don't hang out. Now, there is something about the amount of online time that simulates community time, but doesn't actually have that one-on-one or group feel where you can actually communicate love to each other. And because of that, I think people are getting more and more isolated, and they believe what's written on the message boards, and they believe the trolls that are sitting there. And I think that is something that we do need to address.
It's especially hard not to make those a reality when that's your whole world.
Yeah. So I think there is something really important that we need to address about community in general. How are we getting together physically and talking and hanging out and giving us somebody? You can't give somebody a hug through the internet. It's just not possible.
We've talked about the online community a fair bit in our podcast, and
because it's just super increasing in its prevalence, as you were saying.
And I think it consistently appears like it is a equal replacement for physical community, and I think people as a result feel kind of empty when that isn't what they get. And I think it's so easy for the story to be, oh, okay, well, I need more online community then. And you see that in like people addicted to Facebook or addicted to their Instagram, that they are just continuing to look for intimate connection where they can't find it.
And approval.
Yeah.
Watching your post to see how many likes you get it's a real thing. I mean, people, and if you're not getting the positive feedback that you want, it feels really bad.
So is that sort of step one to connect people to a physical community?
People need to get together more often, in physical spaces. I think that that's one of the most important steps towards having somebody that is there for you. I think that's huge. Do you guys know the author Brene Brown? Mm-hmm. She does a really cool little talk on empathy, and she goes through these different scenarios, and it's animated, this one that I was watching, but trying to explain that when somebody's really down in this hole, that most of the time it seems like somebody is at the top of the hole trying to tell you to come out. And they aren't experiencing it, or they're trying to, she uses the word silver lining it. She's like, I just made up a word. But, it's like, well, yeah, you might have it like this, but you've got this going on in your life, and that's good, right? Like always trying to give the alternative, which sounds like it's a nice thing to say, but it's not recognizing the pain that somebody's in the moment. And the culmination of the video is she basically says, it's really just getting down in the hole and going, this sucks, but I'm here. Let's just be here together. Mm-hmm. And
just being is important.
Yeah, it's
because I definitely fall prey to being the one outside of the hole and being like, here are all these things to do. Why aren't you doing them? Yeah, and it's not a part of myself that I like or want to reinforce.
Yeah, and that idea of like trying to draw them away from the negative to positive feels so instinctively like what you should do. Like, oh, look at all the blessings you have. Look at all the great things in your life. But it actually ends up being reductive of what they're going through. It's like, why do you keep looking at those things when the huge thing is this bad thing that I can't get away from?
Yeah.
And I think if you don't approach that and really work through your feelings around it and thoughts around it, no matter how much you try to look at the good things, you're not going to be able to get away from that.
Yeah. Well, have you guys seen the movie What Dreams May Come?
Yes, a while ago.
It's an awesome movie. I think it's Robin Williams.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
another connection there, unfortunately. But the movie, a lot of the images of what heaven and hell are like are actually taken from the writings of Swedenborg in that movie. The movie does take it a little weird direction at the end into reincarnation, but forget that part. Essentially, Robin Williams ends up going to try to retrieve his wife from the hell that she went into after taking her own life.
Wow.
And in the end, like what ended up finally really breaking through to her, because, you know, he was told by another angel that was guiding him or whatever that, you know, suicides don't come back. That's not going to happen. You can't do it. And so in the end, Robin Williams, his character, decides, well, I'm going to live in hell with my wife. And just stays. And it's, you know, really powerful. I get choked up thinking about it. Where, you know, it was like, nope, this is so important to me to be with her that, yep, I'll give up eternity in heaven to be with her.
Yeah, it goes all back to what we're saying about love being that final thing that saves, that bonds, that connects. It's really powerful.
Yeah, and I think that's why that's another part of why we see so much of a connection between mental disorders and suicide, because mental disorders are often extremely isolating because you're going through something in your mind that no one else could possibly understand. And when things like that happen, especially, I mean, what I can speak from is my experience with depression. And to be clear, I don't think that I have clinical depression. I think I had depressive thoughts and depressive cycles. But my experience with those depressive tendencies was that even when I was with people, I felt isolated and felt like I wanted to leave always and get away and be by myself. And when I was by myself, there was a part of me that realized how much worse it was immediately. Like, yeah, maybe I'm not happy with these people, but even being sad with a bunch of people is way better than feeling empty by myself. And so, yeah, community is a huge thing. And I think with suicidal tendencies, it's so often goes with isolation, especially as it approaches that act.
For some reason that flipped a switch in my brain and made me think of another huge part of this topic is the people who are left behind or left here dealing with the amount that there's so much guilt that people, especially family members, have afterwards. And just always wondering, what could I have done to change the outcome? And because, you know, family members are close, they're like, I could have been there in that moment. And there's so much blaming of ourselves. And that's another thing that I think could be a 10-hour podcast.
Maybe before we get to that, because I think that's critically important, but I want to make sure we've covered what to talk about to someone who's going through that. You know, we talked about plugging into a community and you as the listener just having true empathy of getting down in that hole with them and just being, not trying to solve, not trying to lift them out necessarily, but just being with them. So we have those two things. Are there other things from your like religious background that you would?
This isn't so much from my religious background, but professional.
Person,
it is something that like I wouldn't take very long before calling somebody that can help. That's a professional at it. I'm technically called a non-professional counselor, so I have training, but I don't have the degree. But that's one of the first things that a non-professional counselor is supposed to know is I'm not the person that can help everybody. I need to be a person that knows who can help.
Right.
And I think if we have friends, hopefully, that are that we trust, but to be able to go to the right people and say, I don't think I can help you in this moment, but I'd like for you to get some help. Can we go talk to somebody together?
Yeah.
And actually taking them to a counselor, to a therapist, whatever it is. I think that's a huge thing for somebody to be able to do, is to recognize I can't fix it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's big. What if there's a case where you're with a friend and they swear you to secrecy, of saying, please don't tell anyone, it's just between us, but I'm having these thoughts. Is that a case where you kind of break that trust in order to try to save this person?
I would try to get their permission first. I would say something along the lines of, I really think I should tell somebody else.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I do? And trying to get permission for it. But yeah, if not, then I think that it's the type of situation where the trust is actually in keeping them alive.
Yeah. The bigger form of trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, those are all great things.
And I also think in those scenarios, there's a reason they're telling you, right?
Yeah, it's a cry for help, right?
That they're not telling you because they want to continue dealing with what they're dealing with by themselves. And so I think a lot of times it seems like they're reaching out to as far as they are able to. And even just that probably feels terrifying. And so them saying don't reach out to anyone else, I think is a fear barrier a lot of the time than like a barrier that would have any real negative effect on their life. So yeah, I think, and in that circumstance, their life is way more important. Even if you save their life and you guys are never friends again after that, that would be horrible. That would suck for sure. But they're alive.
Yeah. And that's the important thing. Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great framework. I'd love to also then go back to that place you were in, Alan, when you had that person take their own life and you had to give your first sermon. Like, what did you say to that family?
Well, it's my family.
Your family,
so, that was kind of a strange thing. My sister wasn't sure if she was like, talking to my mom and going, I don't want anybody else to do it than Alan, but I don't know if he's going to be able to, because Carl and I were really close. Yeah. We played a lot of guitar together, worked on cars together, those things, and my mom told her, no, you have to give him the right to refuse. So I was like, how am I going to get through this? And a tip for you going into the ministry when you get to do these fun funerals is lots of water so that when you start choking up, you take a sip, and it actually does help you get through and not just become a pile of tears. In dealing with his family in particular, they didn't grow up with the same ideas of the afterlife that I did in the new church, with such strong ideas of the afterlife. So bringing some of that into it was really, I think, helpful for that family, because they've never thought about what it would be like to wake up in the other world and that love that people are feeling, and then that they're still the same human being that they always were, that he's now free of the condition that's been torturing him for the last 10 years. That's amazing, to think Carl is more Carl now than you've seen him for 10 years now. And that was very comforting for his mother especially, and his father is an interesting guy who was playing harmonica along with the music at the funeral. But it was really, especially with any memorial service, I like to paint a real picture of the person. Who were they really? And not sugarcoating it. I mean, you don't go into all the details of the nasty stuff, but really painting a realistic picture of who that person is. That's the person we're celebrating today, and celebrating their eternal life. And yeah, with him, I brought up a lot of the ideas of that wherever he was at in his own personal reformation and regeneration, he's going to pick right back up, but he's going to have all of his rational mind there. And he was a very well-loved guy. Yeah. He was really, and going back to the idea of, the eternal destination of people who take their own lives, like, you can't sit there and tell me that the rest of who that person was, who obviously was, very kind, caring, passionate, considerate, would, take off his shirt off his back and give it to you. He was just that kind of guy. You can't say that action negates.
Right. That one dark place they were in is their entire being now.
Yeah.
No.
So, yeah, that one moment or that one action does not define the person.
Their lifetime.
But they're, and this happens. We have to deal with death. It's just part of, I think somewhat it's helped remind us that these bodies aren't all that important. As beautiful as this red beard and that red beard and that red beard are, these bodies aren't that important. Like, they're here for a reason for right now, and we should live in them as well as we can. But it's important to go, oh, and yep, the Lord didn't just create us for now, but forever. That's amazing. I love that idea. I mean, otherwise, I've got a lot of people that I'll never see again.
Yeah.
And I don't like that alternative.
Yeah. So how do you also then deal with survivor's guilt of asking, what if I was there, I could have been there and I chose not to be, or I didn't know, or I'm at fault for this? How do you deal with people saying that?
Because it is. I think that's the hardest part of dealing with families going through loss like this, is not the loss itself, but the guilt that goes with it, and feeling so shameful that they didn't notice the signs earlier, that they, could have been there more frequently, or could have said that they loved them more often. Something could have gotten through. And I think that, I hate saying this, but it takes a lot of time for somebody to come back around from it. Especially spouses, and parents. Parents feel that guilt really badly, and spouses do too. So I wish I had a great answer, but it's just gone, being with them as they go through a lot of that, and gently reminding them, there's no way that we can't look back. There's no way to rewind. Even if there was something that you could have done, it didn't happen. And that's the situation we're in. And how do we move forward? How do we build back up?
Not trapping ourselves in that what if history, and focusing on what we can do now to move forward. Yeah,
and that's, I wish I had a magic answer. There just really isn't much of one.
Yeah.
Not that I've discovered.
No. But I think there is an element of, it's the same way in life, not the same, but similar, if we've done something bad or that we regret, to kind of trap ourselves in that history and beat ourselves up for this one's little circumstance. And I think that caps on its use pretty quickly. Of us, like, really the only useful thing is to realize, okay, I screwed up. Now how do I progress from here? And when dealing with a case of, being there for a friend in need, whether it's a suicidal case or just a family matter or a traumatic experience or something, I feel like the only use, I don't know what you guys have to think, but I feel like the only use is to see, okay, maybe I could have done that in this scenario. I didn't. It is what it is. How can I go about my relationships now to be the kind of person maybe I could have been or wanted to have been? How do I use this event to better my relationships and move forward and not stick myself in what could have been?
Yeah, and there are... Yeah, go ahead.
And just thinking about it, how many motivational speakers around the topic of suicide have not in some way dealt with it? And so often I think we see that what people can bring out of it, and in my opinion what the Lord can bring out of it, is awareness and people using their experience to say, how can I teach other people so that hopefully someone else doesn't have to go through this, so that hopefully someone else that's struggling recognizes that they can get help, or someone else that has a friend that's struggling recognizes the signs early enough, or things like that. And so I think so often with tragedy, we see inspiration to something amazing. And one of my favorite teachings in the new church is that no good thing is able to happen no bad thing is able to happen that the Lord can't bring something good out of. Mm. And so I think for someone who is struggling with that, yes, totally, there's no easy fix. It's always going to be hard. And with that pain, you can hopefully create something useful.
I do think we have to be extra clear that we don't see it that the Lord wants this to happen.
Yeah, definitely not.
I feel like some, religions can get into that sort of system, and that's not what we're about.
That's actually another aspect, and I do think there are a couple of practical things that somebody who's dealing with what we're calling survivor's guilt, and they sound like, why would that help, really? But they do. Number one is drinking a lot of water. I know I've said that a couple of times now. Drinking water, staying hydrated, has a huge impact on our mood. So practically speaking, that does help a lot. And then a habit that you're regularly involved in, like say you like running, go for a daily run. It'll be 1 hour a day where you'll actually sit there and go, oh, I didn't stay completely focused in my grief. Doing something that is good for you and habitual is a practical thing that we can do when we're dealing with grief.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that was something for me a long time ago. I had a family instance with suicide, and I won't get into too much detail, but I remember something happened, and the next day I went to school. And I had the option of not going to school for the whole week, but I for whatever reason where I was, that was my form of processing, was to stick to routine and schedule and go to school and pretend like everything was normal. And I think there was an element of not dealing with some stuff that I put off for a long time. But I also think people, cope in their own sort of ways, and maybe that was right for me at the time or something. So I do think there's an element of figuring out what is going to be best for you, whether it's routine or talking to someone or something proactive at least.
Mm-hmm. I guess the other thing I was thinking of is the people who are around the core who's lost somebody. So you say you have the person who's taken their life, then you have the family and closest friends around that, and then you have all the community that's there supporting the family that's going through the loss, right? There are some things that I've come to know are really difficult things that we say habitually, and I think that's the wrong way to put it, but common ways that we try to help people cope with loss. One of them is that idea of, the Lord needed them for some use in it. Man, well, I needed him here, right? And we can, that's a hard thing for somebody to hear in that moment, and it's also not the truth. The truth is that the Lord could do all of these jobs by himself. He's all powerful. There are reasons why the Lord permitted it, and that stings, and he doesn't want it that way. Right. So that idea of the Lord had need of him, or another one that's often said is they're in a better place now. And as true as that can be, it's very hard for people in the midst of grief to hear it.
Especially close people.
Because it's like, why was it not better with me?
Yeah. I didn't do enough.
Yeah. Like, they're better not with me than they were with me is such a word you can easily take that.
Yep. And then the other big one that we often say is trying to empathize with them by saying something like, "Oh, I know what you're going through," or those types of things, especially when somebody is lost to suicide. They're going, "You have no idea what I'm going through." Even if you've gone through loss like the same way, we have no idea what each other are going through in those moments. And it's almost better to just go, "Hey, I'm here.
Yeah.
What can I do?" Even sometimes asking that question can be too much because they don't know.
Right. So I think just being there in the totality of that word, being physically present, being emotionally present, just being a listener, being a shoulder for them, being whatever they need without even having to say that is really important.
I was talking with a lady from the Detroit area, and she had lost her daughter. And this is years later, but I was asking, what were some of the best things that people could have, did for you when you were going through that? And she said, one of the best things that happened is, she said, "I still don't know who did it, but somebody came in every day and secretly washed the dishes." Like, that was huge to her. Like, just, go on, do your thing. I'm not going to bother you. I'm not going to just wash the dishes.
Yeah.
And someday I'm hoping to write a book kind of on this idea of how do we help better. And it's based on three survey questions. So it's mostly a case study. And the questions I want to ask people who have gone through different types of tragic loss are, what was something that was really good for you in that moment? What was that other people had said or done? What was something that was really bad for you and felt that was harmful? And then what was something that seemed harmful at the time, but later on you saw it was really good? And I want to do this thousands of case studies just to see, are there ways that we can better perform as helpers, as somebody who's there to care for somebody who's going through loss.
Yeah.
And we'll see.
I think it's super useful because tons of people have that thrust upon them when they don't know what to do.
That whole thing about just secretly washing the dishes reminds me of a conversation I was having with a man who had lost his wife to suicide. And the community around him was really, really supportive. And people showed up multiple times a day to bring them meals. They didn't have to cook. And he said the hardest part about it was he wasn't ready to be social. And yet people were always there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like they were like, "Oh, here's a meal." Some of them were just like, "Here's a meal, bye." And some of them were like, "Here's a meal, how are you? Like, do you need to talk? Can I go through anything with you?" And it became overwhelming for him, where he was like, 10 people a day come to my home and try to instigate these conversations that I'm not ready to have with people that aren't extremely close to me. And so it just, I don't know, because at first I was thinking, "Oh, it's so nice people are bringing this guy all these meals. It's we're killing it community."
Yeah.
And that's not what he needed.
Yeah.
And so it's just really interesting to look at what we think is helpful and what that person needs. It's just a really complicated question.
Yeah. One of the families that I was really close with, they lost two of their sons. One of basically I sat on their couch for a week because I was close enough to be kind of family, but not involved in what they were doing with the minister and working with the service and their own grieving process. But they wanted me to be there. So my job was to basically sleep on the couch next to the front door. And when anybody came up to answer the door and say, "I'm sorry, we're not ready for company right now. Thank you so much for coming by. I'll let them know that you came." And so literally I slept on the couch for a week, and it's
Physical and emotional
nonstop
bodyguard.
people, coming to the door to, be kind and to show them love as the community does around here, especially. But yeah, it was just, sorry, they're not able to see people right now.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean don't go
Yeah.
to the house.
Right.
I think that it was useful that they knew enough in their grief to say, "We can't handle having people here. Is it okay if you do that?" Yeah, whatever I can do.
Yeah.
Dang. Well, maybe later in life when you've published that book, we'll have you back on here for a little book tour.
I've had this in mind for 6 years now, and I haven't written a single word yet. But I do have other people who have said that they'll co-write it with me.
That's good. I can help you set up an internet survey if you just want random audiences for things.
Yeah.
But yeah, as we're winding down here, I want to thank you for coming on here and sharing your experiences. And Richard, thank you for opening up about some of the hard times in your life.
Yeah.
It was, I think, really special and meaningful to hear. So thank you both for that. And yeah, I guess sorry for if you came in here for a light, fun, goofy time talking about God. You got a little bit more serious today, dear audience. But thank you for being with us through this. And I hope that if you have something serious like this going on in your life, maybe we helped in some way. And if you have a contrasting view or something helpful to add, please put it in the comment section below. We'd love to hear back from anyone. As always, Spiritable is on Spotify and TuneIn and iTunes and all the podcast places, as well as our video on YouTube. And you can go find our social media on Instagram at Grand Human Project. Same with Facebook and Twitter, although we don't do too much on Twitter. Alan, is there anything you want to plug for yourself coming out of this?
Not so much a plug, more just like in closing thoughts. I think that, just whoever, if you are dealing with your own thoughts of harm or suicide, to please get help and know that you really are loved, like absolutely adored. You are absolutely adored, and every human is, especially by the Lord. But I will also say I love you dearly. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, people are things that we should love.
Let us love. I like that. Well, thank you so much.
Nothing else to plug other than I think we're going to do some more work together, so that's cool.
Yes, we will. Further conversation.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Alan, and thank you guys for listening.
Yeah.